Hi, welcome back to my channel, The Gentle Flamingo. In part 2 of my Nerdy Gurdy build, I'm actually going to start putting things together in this video. Just a side note, though, I do not follow the instructions exactly as they are in the Nerdy Gurdy assembly instructions that are available on Thingiverse, but it's close enough. It's maybe a moot point, but anyway, just wanted to let you know that. So, let's get started. I'll start with the original drone bridge. For my Gurdy, I'll be using the alternate drone bridge design, but I'll go ahead and show you how to put this one together just in case you like it better than the alternate drone. Before I put the pieces together, I'm going to lightly sand them with some fine grit sandpaper to make sure the top grain is a little smoother, and then wipe the dust away with an old rag. I'll also wipe down the edges of the piece to remove any soot left over from the laser cutting. I'm going to do this with almost every single piece, although I won't make you watch it every time. Now that everything is sanded, let's glue it together. I'll be using this Titebond 2 wood glue for all gluing on this Gurdy, and I'm using what I have to hand, so if it's not the best of the best, it will at least do for my purposes. To put this drone bridge together, I'll brush the glue onto one side of the centerpiece, and then put on one of the side pieces, making sure that the bottom and back sides are flush with the centerpiece, which has this small tab on the bottom back corner that fits into a slot on the top of the Gurdy. Once it's aligned to my satisfaction, I'll clamp it and leave it to dry for at least 30 minutes according to the instructions on the glue bottle. After 30 minutes, I'll repeat the process for the other side. If you're like me and not paying enough attention to realize that you've spread your glue onto the little tab of the centerpiece, just sand that part clean once the glue is dried. Then, just like the first side, I'll make sure that the bottom and back sides are flush and then stick it in a clamp. Now that it's dry, you can see how the centerpiece makes these two little slots. And to finish off the drone bridge, I'll place the two sliding pieces in the slots with the smaller one in the top slot and the larger one in the bottom slot. The drone strings will run through the notches on the sliders, and they can be adjusted and held in place with 10mm N3 bolts, which I'll show you later. Now let's put together the alternate drone bridge design, which is the one that I'll be using for this Gurdy. This alternate drone bridge has a couple of 3D printed collars that will come into play later, so I'll set them aside for now. Starting with one of the side pieces, the top of the bridge has the two fully enclosed slots, while the bottom has the three open slots for the three centerpieces. I'll start with the back centerpiece, which has the little tab on the bottom to attach the bridge to the top of the Gurdy. It fits into the back two slots of the side piece. Then the middle piece, which has the straight bottom on it, fits into the two middle slots. Before I put in that third piece, I'll go ahead and put the other side piece on, and then just slide the front centerpiece into the remaining slots. You can see that the hole in the tops of the back and middle centerpieces line up, as well as the holes in the bottoms of the front and middle centerpieces. 20mm N3 bolts with the 3D collars will go through those holes, which I'll show you in my general setup video once I'm finished putting everything together. Here is my finished drone bridge. As you can see, I'm painting this Gurdy, although most makers choose to stain it instead of paint it. For most of these other pieces, I'm just going to show you the dry fit and then the finished piece. You should go ahead and dry fit everything before you glue any of it, just to make sure everything fits together well. Laser cutters are good, but no laser cutter is perfect. You may need to lightly file some slots and edges so that everything goes together smoothly. Once the dry fit goes well, then go ahead and glue tabs into slots. Next, I'll put the trumpet bridge together. Like the drone bridge, I'll set the 3D printed parts aside and start with one of the side pieces. The top of this bridge has this little top knot of sorts, and the bottom is straight. I'm going to start with the middle shelf piece, which has a small tab to fit into the back of the bridge, and its front is this rounded bit. It fits into the rectangular slot in the side piece. Then I'll put the back piece on. I didn't show it very well, but the back piece has a small tab for attaching the bridge to the body, just like the drone bridge. Make sure that it points towards the bottom. Then I'll put the other side piece on. And here's my finished trumpet bridge. As with the drone bridge, I'll show you how the printed parts go in when I do my general setup video. Now for the tailpiece, which is essentially the bridge for the melody strings. It looks a little daunting, but if you take it one bit at a time, it's not too bad. Just like the other two bridges, this one has some parts that I'm going to set aside for now. And I'm going to put this tailpiece together in two parts. The first part will use these 4 pieces, and the second part will use all the rest. For the first part, I'll start with this piece. The end that kind of looks like a pterodactyl head will attach to the second part of the tailpiece, and this end with a little hook will attach to the body of the Gurdy. This piece has a wide slot in the middle for this piece to slide through. Make sure that these small holes are towards the pterodactyl head when you glue everything together. I made the mistake of getting it backwards for my first Nerdy Gurdy. It still works that way, but makes the setup just a little bit more difficult. Next, slot the other 2 pterodactyl-headed pieces onto the tabs of the little holy piece. Make sure that all the pterodactyl heads are facing the same way. Go ahead and glue all these pieces together before starting on the second piece. To make sure everything lines up correctly, you can use what I'm going to call the tower pieces to hold the middle pterodactyl piece in the correct position. These are just for alignment's sake. Do not glue these tower pieces into place here. Once the glue is dried, remove the tower pieces and set the first part of the tailpiece aside to work on the second part, which will start with these 3 pieces. I'll glue the shorter middle piece to one of the tower pieces, making sure to line up the middle slot and the bottom and side edges of the little feet areas. Then I'll add the second tower piece. Notice how the middle piece sticks up a little above the 2 tower pieces in these 3 spots. That's what these little pterodactyl mouths will bite onto when the 2 parts of the tailpiece go together. It's a little hard to show you with just the dry fit, so give me a second to get these 2 bits finished off right quick. Okay, now that I've finished the rest of the pieces, making sure to leave bare wood where I'll be gluing things together, I'm going to take these 2 N3 nuts and press fit them with some pliers into the 2 hexagonal pterodactyl eyes on the first part. Then, to keep the glue out of the threads, I'm going to put an M3 bolt in just until I feel it come through on the other side of the nut. To put the 2 parts together, the 3 pterodactyl heads will fit down on the sides and in the middle slot of the tower part. Make sure to line up the big slots in the 2 parts into one long slot, and make sure that you push those pterodactyl heads all the way down. On mine, this side is a little warped, so I'll need to make sure I clamp it down when I glue these two pieces together. Once the glue is dry, I'll remove the bolts, but we'll keep them close because I'm not quite done with them. You can see that I've marked my last two pieces to make sure I get them on correctly. These two pieces are identical and symmetrical, so if you plan to stain your Gurdy instead of painting it, you don't have to worry about marking them like that. To put these two pieces on, I'll take the little bolt and put it through the hole and then thread it back into the nut to keep the glue out of the threads. Then this little side piece fits down onto the two tabs of the tower piece. Then I'll do the same thing with the other side. And here's my finished tailpiece. You can see how I left the little hooks and the bottom of the tower part unpainted for when I glue the tailpiece to the body. Next, I'll put the key box together. This end of the key box will be towards the wheel, and this end will be towards the tuning head. First, I'll put the bottom and this small end piece together, and then turn that on its side to put one of the side pieces on. Once that side is on, I'll turn the box over to the other side and put on the other side piece. Sorry for all the focus shifts. I'll get that figured out one day. After struggling to put this side on while watching through the camera screen, it's time to put the other end on. You'll notice that the word inside is printed on it. As I'm sure you've guessed, this is the side that needs to face towards the inside of the key box. And here's my key box all finished up. I've tried to leave future gluing surfaces paint-free and also tried to avoid getting paint into the keyholes. I was mostly successful but did get a little bit in them, but I can just file that off very gently if it causes a problem later. Now for the key box lid. It's one of the simpler pieces of this Gurdy to put together. Just spread your glue on and stack the pieces together, making sure that the piece with the 4 slots is an outside piece and all the edges line up. Clamp it all together and let it dry. And here is my key box lid for now. I'll clean it up, round over the top edges, and paint it in another video. Now let's put the tuning head together. Starting with the 2 tuning head and column pieces, turn one over so that it mirrors the other. Then take your 2 side pieces and glue them on. Don't worry too much about lining up the outside edges, but do make sure that the holes and slots line up well so that the other pieces will fit in properly. You can always file or sand those outside edges later. Now that the glue is dry, I will warn you to be careful with these little ear pieces. I broke this one twice while practicing the dry fit. Thankfully though, I can just glue it back together and it'll do just fine. Next, I'll fit in the bottom of the tuning head, which is this piece, which kind of reminds me of a robot man with short little legs and arms. His little legs will be pointing towards the body of the Gurdy. Take one of the column pieces and turn it so that the side piece is down and you can see the smaller slots of the side piece through the larger slots of the column piece. The step tabs of the bottom will fit into these slots. Mine is a tight fit, so enjoy my struggle for a second. Make sure that the bottom fits all the way against the column piece. There should be no space between them. Do the same with the other side. You'll notice that the smallest parts of those step tabs stick through the side pieces. Those will fit into the Gurdy sides when we put them on in another video. Next, I'll put on the two inner pieces of the tuning head. I think someone in the Nerdy Gurdy Builders Facebook page called them cowhead pieces. I mean, pretty nice description if you ask me. These two pieces will slot into the sides and their tabs will fit into the slots in the bottom piece. Be careful to put them in as straight as you can though. The little earpieces can break if they go in too sideways. Also, push these pieces all the way down until the tops are flush with the side pieces. I'm not doing that here because it's such a tight fit on mine that I'm not sure I'll be able to get it back out for painting and such without breaking it. Put the second piece in the same way in the second set of slots. Again, push it all the way down when you glue it together. There should be no space between it and the bottom. For the next piece, I like to turn the tuning head so that the column is towards me since the piece will fit into these slots. The smudges you see on this piece are from previous dry fittings and not from the cutting process, so try to ignore them. It slides in like so. Once again, make sure that it goes all the way down into the slots. The next piece of the tuning head is this one. I'm not really sure what to call it, but it does go right here. Make sure that it slides all the way up to meet the previous piece. I'm not really sure if you should put glue at this line. I didn't on my first Nerdy Gurdy and I didn't on this one, and both of them function just fine. If someone knows different, please put it in the comments. In part 1 of this build, I had these pieces grouped with the tuning head. These 4 will be used when I put the machine tuners in. And these 2 you'll see in a bit when I attach the top and bottom to the column. I'll put these 2 on after I attach the long side pieces to the body. There'll be little braces for these wings that are sticking out here. The last part of the tuning head is this piece, which is the nut for the melody strings. It will fit into this slot later after everything else is finished. So here's my tuning head for now. There are still some parts to glue onto the sides, so those areas remain unpainted. Next, I'll glue the 2 handle pieces together. I'm going to glue mine together like this so that the nuts attaching it to the all thread that I'm using will be seated in the little hexagonal cutouts and not sticking out to catch on anything. You could also glue it together the opposite way if you want. It will function just the same, so experiment and see which way you like better. Next, I'll glue the two parts of my wheel together, making sure to line up the marks I made in the first video. To be sure that the wheel dries relatively flat, I'm going to weigh it down with a board and some bricks. So here's the dry wheel. I've got a little unevenness around the edges in places, but that'll be taken care of when I do the shaping and truing in the next video. It did drift a little bit after I put the bricks on, but that doesn't really bother me since I'll be painting it and the 3D printed wheel hub fits in just fine. Next are the two inner braces. The only thing to put together here are these two pieces. This is one of those that you can't get wrong. It's a symmetrical piece, so it doesn't matter how you glue it together as long as you make sure that the outside edges are all lined up. The top and bottom tabs on one piece are larger than the other though, to correspond with the slots on the top and bottom of the body. The part that I'm calling the end block has three pieces. The piece with the big rectangle hole will be the inside of the end block, and the two pieces with the round holes will be the outside. With your kit, you should have this printed piece. It's a gluing guide to make sure these two pieces are aligned correctly. Put the smaller piece on first, apply glue, and then put the larger piece on. Make sure not to glue the guide to the wooden pieces though. The smaller piece will fit into the rectangular hole on the inside part of the end block. Something like this when it's all said and done. But don't glue the inner part to the outer part, they need to stay separate for now. Next, I'm going to attach the bearings to the outer part of the end block and that inner brace we glued together a minute ago, using these printed bearing rings. I'll press my bearing into the ring and then place it down so that the small holes in the ring line up with the holes in the brace. Now the printed holes are a little too small for the bolts that I'm using, so I'll just take these two parts over to the drill press and make those holes just a little bit bigger. If you use a screw instead of a bolt, you probably won't have this problem. Now it's just a relatively simple matter to put in all the bolts. You'll notice that my bolts go almost all the way through these two parts. The brace will be inside the body and not seen, and the outer part of the end piece will be painted, so that doesn't really bother me. If you want to avoid this, use a shorter bolt or screw. Next, I'm going to glue the borders onto the top and bottom pieces of the body. These two borders are identical and symmetrical, so no worries about which one you put where. I'll do the bottom one first. On the larger end, make sure that the large notch on the border is centered and lines up with the inside edges of the two slots. And then at the narrow end, make sure that the inside edges of the border line up with the outside edges of the two slots there. On the top piece, make sure that this bit here lines up between these two sets of slots with the notch of the border centered just like the bottom. At the narrow end of the top, the outside edges of the border should line up with the inside edges of those two side notches. Before gluing the borders down, take a look at both sides of the top and bottom pieces to see which side you want facing the outside of your Gurdy. Then mark the inside so that you can be sure that you glue the borders onto that side. The last thing I'll do on this video is assemble the body with the pieces that we have so far. This is one of the places where I don't follow the instructions as written. This is just the way that I like to do it. It is by no means the best way. I'm going to start with the inner brace that looks like an oversized T and the top piece. Now in the dry fit, I found that this brace fits best when it's turned a certain way, so I marked the side that should face me with a star. I'll attach this brace to the top so that the hole is towards the top of the Gurdy. The tab on this brace will fit into this slot here, and the 2 notches on the arms will fit into these notches on the border. While that's drying, I'll attach the tuning head to the bottom piece. You'll notice that there are 2 notches and a tab on the bottom of the 2 sides of the column. The notches will fit over the border here, and the tabs will fit into these 2 slots. Make sure that you press it all the way down so that there's no space between the bottom of the column and the bottom piece. And here's my weird clamping setup. It made me laugh, so I thought I'd just share it with you. Next, I'll attach the top to the column. Just like the bottom, each side has 2 notches and a tab. The notches will fit over the border piece just like the bottom did, and the tabs will fit into these 2 slots. The narrow end of the top will slide under these 2 projecting pieces, and these notches will fit in right here. You can see where the paint is worn away from a couple of dry fittings. Slide the top back until you can push it down into the notches on the column. Then press the other notches and tabs into place. Next, I'll put in the inner brace with the bearing attached. The bearing should point towards the tail of the Gurdy, and if this brace is assembled correctly, it won't really go in wrong because of the shape of the tabs and slots on the top and the bottom. Once this brace is in, I'll get the T-brace into place. And next I'll glue in the inner piece of the end block, making sure that the big rectangular hole is towards the top of the Gurdy. It fits into the slots on the top and bottom that are centered in that big notch in the borders. And more clamps and glue drying. One can never have too many clamps. Now for these 2 pieces. I forgot to film the dry fitting before painting them, but I think you can tell which pieces they are. I'll put this one in first. This notch here will go into this slot, and the tab will fit into this slot. Push it all the way down. The bottom of that top slot should be below the edges of this piece. Now for the last piece of this video, it will slide under these little earpieces and its slot will fit around the previous piece. Push it all the way in until it's flush with the ends of those little earpieces. Alright, that's the end of part 2 of this Nerdy Gurdy build. Join me for part 3, where we will work on this wheel. Probably just the wheel. Bye! Well, since this can happen, I suppose the world's an okay place after all. Note to all filmmakers, make sure you press record. Won't you join me? No, won't you join me as part of the poetry videos, silly? Shenanigans. Steamboat shenanigans. Is that a copyright issue?